Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the All Me podcast. This is Don Hooten Jr., and today I'll be your host. According to Wikipedia, mixed martial arts, or MMA, is sometimes referred to as cage fighting, no holds bar, and ultimate fighting. It's a full contact combat sport based on striking, grappling, and ground fighting, incorporating techniques from various combat sports, including boxing, kickboxing, and martial arts from around the world. This morning, I had the opportunity to interview a former professional MMA athlete and UFC fighter, Mike King. Mike got into the MMA when the sport was just starting to become mainstream. Growing up in a wrestling family, he learned the world of combat sports quickly, which ultimately led him to a professional career and fighting in the UFC. If you've ever listened to our podcast, you'll know that both athletes and non-athletes at some point in their lifetime will feel the pressure to use appearance and performance-enhancing substances. While working his way up to the UFC, Mike felt those pressures too. It's Mike's story of anabolic steroid use that brought our paths together in life. Following a positive test for performance-enhancing drugs, Mike was faced with the decision that all professional athletes are faced with. What do I do when it comes to telling the public when I'm interviewed about the failed test? Not many athletes take the path that Mike did, but his decision to come clean is one that is important to him and one I know the fans respect. Honesty and integrity is important to Mike, so I know you're going to appreciate all of the information he's going to give us during this interview. Please consider making a donation to the Taylor Hooten Foundation so that we can continue to deliver our important messages around the world. Now let's hear from professional UFC fighter Mike King. Mike, good morning and welcome to the All Me podcast.
Hey, Don, it's great to finally sit down with you and chat a bit.
Yes, this is going to be a lot of fun because, Mike, you have a great story to tell, and it's one that everyone needs to hear. And I'd love to get to know you a little bit better and learn about the path that took you to becoming a professional fighter. So what I'd like to start with is let's talk about where you grew up and what were some of your interests as a young man?
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town called Dresden, Ohio. Went to a high school called Tri-Valley. Very small farm town in southeastern Ohio. Mm-hmm. My dad was a wrestling coach for, I think, almost 30 years at this high school. So growing up, wrestling was one of probably my biggest passions. Mm-hmm. And then naturally, a small farm town, you tend to fall into football as well because, Friday Night Lights, and you being from Texas, you totally understand Friday Night Lights.
Yeah.
So I grew up, and there was a lot of, especially where I came from, there was a lot of focus on athletics.
Okay. So, what did you start wrestling? Did you kind of follow in your dad's footsteps?
Yeah. My dad wrestled in college. Briefly before he had a son at 19 years old. But he was he was a state, he went to state a couple years at high school. He grew up wrestling. My uncle wrestled. It's been a long line of wrestlers coming out of the King family.
So what age were you when you got into wrestling?
The first time I actually competed in wrestling, I was 4 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I've had this conversation with my dad before, and he actually doesn't remember the first time that I stepped on a mat. Same with my little brother. There's a guy named John Heindel that the Tri-Valley High School wrestling room is named after, and this was my dad's high school coach. And he used to have all the young kids in the area come over to his home in the evenings on, I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays. And this is from, when you first started walking. Mm-hmm. So there's a rich tradition of wrestling at this school. And you just kind of fall in line, and once you start doing it at such a young age, it just becomes part of your identity in a way.
Yeah. So when like, you're growing up and you get into middle school, high school, from an athletic standpoint, did you just wrestle? Were there other sports that you played that helped rounded your career, which ultimately led you to becoming a professional athlete?
Oh yeah. By the time I was in junior high and high school, my focus actually had gotten away from wrestling, and I loved football. I ran track on the off seasons. I played football. Track was in the spring. I played football in the fall, and then I wrestled in the winter. So, especially where I was from, you were expected to play, 3 sports.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small school. First off, to fill the teams or field a team, you needed the athletes in the school to play all the sports. I was definitely multi-sport, which I think is best for kids that are growing up.
Absolutely.
Because it builds their bodies in different ways, and it's not so sport specific. For instance, if you play baseball, you're a baseball guy. If you start pitching and throwing curveballs at 10 years old, before you know it, your elbow is going to be, junk by the time you get into later in your career. So there was a big focus on multi-sport athletics at our school, which I think was great because it did add to my fighting career, because one of the things they said about me in the past was how athletic I was. And I believe that was just being introduced to so many different types of athletics.
Absolutely. And I hope a lot of young people hear that, and even parents where, you're 10 years old today and parents are trying to specialize you in one sport where, guys like you growing up that played multiple sports, you're working and developing muscles in those different sports where, it might be great for track, and those muscles are getting worked there, but then you're moving into wrestling and football and you're using a whole different set of muscle groups. So that's such key, especially when it comes to professional athletics and working with, professional athletic trainers, as well as professional strength and conditioning coaches. They'll tell you they're looking for those athletes that played multiple sports, one, because they're extremely athletic, but two, they've had an opportunity to use all of those different muscle groups.
Yeah. And I believe, especially working with guys, high level trainers in my previous career, they're working on, multi-directional movement, and even the physical training these days has moved from what, bigger, faster, stronger was that what everybody used when I was growing up. But nowadays, your functional movement patterns. I mean, everything has changed. The science changes constantly. But we've moved into this spot where, in the 90s and maybe the early 2000s, everybody thought sports specificity was what everybody needed to be doing. But we've moved into a completely different realm where they're trying to expose people in all different movement patterns.
Yeah. And I think that's going to help, and that's going to make what great professional athletes are today even better. And you've had that amazing career path that led you to ultimately becoming a professional UFC fighter, which, if nobody has watched an MMA fight or UFC fight, I highly recommend it. It's great on TV, but I had an opportunity to watch a fight live many years ago when I was in Las Vegas, and it is one of the most unbelievable sports you'll ever watch, and the athleticism will just blow you away when you finally see it live. And that kind of leads me down my next question as to how do you get into the sport of MMA, number one, but number two, was that something you were always interested in becoming, an athlete in combat sports?
I grew up in combat sports. Wrestling is a combat sport.
Okay.
When you look at the Olympics, going back to when they first dated, it was one of the original sports, along with something called pancrase, which is actually MMA. So, we had, the very first Olympics had MMA in it. So I'm waiting to see when MMA falls into our new Olympic as a new Olympic category. But yeah, you're right. It's you have to be fairly athletic to do that. And the path that led me there was, it's very different today because it's become so mainstream. You've got kids that are, 12 years old going into jiu-jitsu gyms or MMA gyms specifically, and they're actually training mixed martial arts growing up. When I started, MMA was still kind of, no one was, I don't want to say no one was doing it because I came along right as it was starting to become mainstream.
Okay.
So what you saw was you either had, sport specific fighters that this guy was a wrestler for 20 years. He wrestled in college, or this guy, for instance, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson was a karate specialist. Or you had a Damian Maya who was a jiu-jitsu specialist, and then they learned the other martial arts. But for me specifically, I wrestled for a long time and developed that skill, and then played football through college. And as I was graduating, one of my coaches, he knew I had a pretty extensive wrestling background, and he suggested that I go do this kickboxing smoker. And the smoker, they don't do these that often anymore because they're probably not real healthy for the brain.
Okay.
But you'll have 3 to 4 kickboxing fights in a night.
Okay.
So you could start fighting at 5 o'clock and not be done till midnight, and quite a bit of damage happened.
Wow.
But I won this kickboxing smoker ultimately. And the coach was like, I think I should introduce you to this coach, which was Josh Williams, who owned Buckeye Mixed Martial Arts. And that's where the story really began for me, was in Columbus, Ohio, in a dirty little gym called Buckeye MMA.
Wow. So, and it's got to be different today for young kids that are coming up because there is so much exposure on the sport. It is so popular. It is mainstream now, where I guess young kids could probably get into some of these UFC gyms at a young age, and they're around coaches that are teaching these various martial arts that could, I guess, set them on a path at a younger age to participating in the sport. Is that a correct statement?
Oh yeah, man. That's why you see the skill. So it used to just be really athletic, aggressive guys. But what you're seeing now, especially the guys that are in their younger 20s, they've been training mixed martial arts since they were in their teens. So when they finally get to the the UFC level, the cream of the crop, this is not just MMA fighting. This is the cream of the crop. They already have a broad skill set. They're black belts in jiu-jitsu. They've been kickboxing or doing Muay Thai for 10 years. So, I mean, it's a completely different level of athlete that you see grace the octagon these days.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And, I know people are like, oh, it's so gory and this and that, but it's like, you need to give it a chance. I had never really tuned into any fights prior to me attending this UFC fight. I believe it was 167. It was George St. Pierre and Johnny Hendricks, and it was held there in Las Vegas. And I just happened to be there speaking, and they offered me a ticket, and the ticket was amazing. And Mike, I tell you, I get there early. And I think it's different than most sports where, you go to a baseball game or a football game, you get there early, tailgate, there's tons of people. Well, I showed up and there might have been 5,000 people in the arena. I'm like, this is supposed to be a big fight. Where is everyone? And you had these smaller athletes, they're rolling around the mats, doing different things. And as the athletes started getting bigger and the names started getting bigger, the audience just started piling into this arena. And I'll never forget, I mean, the music's loud, there's lights everywhere. And as the fight begins, it's dead silent. And all of a sudden, I mean, you can hear when somebody connects, whether it's a kick or a punch, and you're like, wow, this is legit real. And then the crowd just goes crazy. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's electric in those auditoriums at that time. But you're right. It's the pin drop, man. Not a lot of people will understand that, but it's the truth. When you get into that octagon and they lock the door, the crowd goes silent, and it's just you two in front of 20,000 people. It's a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was by maybe the fourth or fifth card that the whole auditorium, it was full, and I'm just like, wow, okay. So it's very much different than a lot of sports that we're used to watching. So I want to shift gears for a second, because one of the most important topics that we try and cover with young people, and especially their adult influencers, is fueling your body for peak performance. And MMA is a very demanding sport, both physically and mentally. So nutrition and exercise, working out, all those sorts of things play a huge role in your success. So I want to talk about what a training and nutrition regimen looks like for you as a professional fighter. Now, when it comes to your training and exercise programs, what do you do to get yourself physically and mentally ready for a fight?
So, it's mixed martial arts. So you're training multiple martial arts per week, and you have to look at the overall volume of exercise that you're putting your body through each week. So you need to strength train, you need to do your cardio work, and then you need to do your sport specific work, which are your martial arts. So, and MMA is a sport that is always happening. You have to be ready for fights. You have to be able to accept fights on a moment's notice, right? So there's no real off season. So the key is fight camps. So you stay training your martial arts so your technique is still there. But as you get closer to fights, or you accept a fight, you have a 4-week notice, or an 8-week or 12-week notice. You're able to start critiquing what you're doing and how your body's feeling. So, but the most important thing, like you're saying, is how you're fueling your body. Mm-hmm. So, obviously it's getting the proper macronutrients into you post training sessions, because most of the time you're training at least twice a day. And that's every day. That's not in fight camps, because fight camps becomes a full-time job. You're in the gym 6 to 8 hours a day. Wow. So we'll say just on an average day, that's, I guess, the easiest way to break it down. You're in the morning, you're either doing your strength training or your conditioning, and then you're fueling instantly after the workout. A few hours later, you're having a nice meal, and then if you have the time and the lifestyle, you're trying to get a nap in as well. Then you wake up in the afternoon. It's almost like the tale of 2 days in one day, because you have your morning sessions where you're eating and fueling and resting, and then you have your afternoon session where it's eating to get ready for the sport, which is going to be, fruits, which are higher in that. You go into your training, you come out, you have your protein and your sugar to replenish your glycogen store with the sugar, and then also the protein starts to then mend the muscle tissue that you've broken down. And then you have your big meal in the evening before you're going to bed again. So it's just it's a monotonous lifestyle. I used to tell people you're kind of like a monk, because you're waking up, you're training, you're eating, you're sleeping, you're waking up, you're eating, you're sleeping, or training, you're sleeping, and going on with your day. So it becomes a very drawn out process that just seems to never end.
And I guess the amount of calories that you would burn in these sessions has got to be in the thousands, which, I mean, obviously would require tons of food and sleep so your body can recover.
Yeah, I mean, you need it's a full-time job. The whole idea of it is it's a full-time job. You're just a good cardio session, you'll burn 1,000 calories, and that's not grappling with another grown man, or woman, depending on if you're a woman. But yeah, I mean, you're burning on average because I used to wear a heart rate monitor. I still kind of do it now because I still train twice a day. You're burning on average from 2,000 to 4,000 calories a day, and that doesn't count the 2,000 or 3,000 calories that your body burns just to stay alive. So you're looking at 4,000 to 6,000 calories burned a day. So you're eating as much or close to as what a bodybuilder would typically be eating, which can be difficult, and that's why you find people that take shortcuts.
Yes. Okay. Which I definitely want to get into with you. So do you notice as you get closer to a fight, does that nutrition program and training program change, or does it sort of remain the same leading up to the night or day of the fight?
Oh yeah, it totally changes. So the way the way it breaks down is in fight camp, you're at the beginning of camp, you're gearing up, right? You're starting to peak your body. So your workouts are longer. I wouldn't say they're at full intensity. So if you were like to look at a scale of what they call rate of perceived exertion, you're somewhere, if it's a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the hardest thing you've ever done, you're trying to train somewhere around a 6 or a 7, right? So your body can recover after the workout. Now, as you get further into your training camp, closer to the fight, you start to push that number up a little bit, but the training sessions get shorter. So your training is more intense, but your session is shorter. So your central nervous system is able to recover. And then as you get to the end of camp, you're so focused on the diet, your calorie count, getting your calories down, because this is a weight restricted sport, right? Your sessions become short sessions at high intensity, and you're not eating a whole lot to recover. So what ends up happening is you detrain a bit. So you peak maybe a week or 2 weeks ahead of your fight, and then you start to detrain, and you kind of just cruise right into the fight day.
Wow, I mean, definitely not a sport for the weak-minded. So tell us about fight day. My question would be is, what does your diet look like that day? Because I mean, you can't. Let's say you're fighting at 7 o'clock at night. You're just gonna throw a number out there.
Yeah.
I mean, at 5 o'clock, you don't want to sit down and have a 40-ounce, ribeye or a porterhouse or whatever, right? I mean,
No.
Throughout the day, what are you doing to prepare your body? Because I'd imagine you obviously want it fueled for that fight, but you can't go in there with a full belly either.
Right. Yeah. I mean, plus at that point, so you'd weigh in the day before, right? So if you fight on a Saturday, you weigh in on Friday. You've been dieting so long that your stomach is quite small, actually. So you start eating at the beginning of the day, or typically what I did was I started eating like pancakes or bread or more of a slow release carbohydrate. And then as I was getting closer to the fight, I started to add in the basic sugars that you need for that quick release stuff. So as you're getting closer throughout the day, you start eating fruit. But these are small meals throughout the day because your stomach is so small from dieting for the last 8 weeks that you can't really get a big meal in there. Ultimately, you want to stay away from proteins because they take a long time to break down. But you're focusing more on fats, which are a longer lasting energy source, and the carbohydrates, which are going to help you store the glycogen needed for that fast twitch exercise that's about to happen.
Okay. Now, you had alluded to earlier in your comments that, I mean, obviously this is very, very difficult. If you really broke this down, Micah, we could probably sit and spend an entire hour talking about a nutrition program leading up to a fight. You are going to have athletes that feel the pressure to use appearance and performance enhancing substance to shorten that distance from point A to point B being the ultimate goal. And one of the issues is that many athletes, and this is both professional and amateur, is the pressure that they face to use appearance and performance enhancing substances to try to get an edge over their competitors. And this is a pressure that most athletes are going to face at some point in their career. And now they have a choice. Do I use these substances to compete, or do I compete clean? And there came a point in your career that you were forced with this very same decision. You came to this crossroad, and ultimately you made the choice to begin using performance enhancing drugs. And I believe it was July of 2014, you had tested positive for the anabolic steroid nandrolone following your fight with, is it Chathal Pendred? Is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah, the Irish people would say you butchered it, but it's that's how we say it.
Okay, that's how we say it. So, but not only did that night cost you around 50 grand with the fight of the night bonus, but your name is plastered all across the media that you had failed a drug test. So let's start with the question I know that is on everyone's mind. Why did you make the decision to use anabolic steroids, and how long were you using them?
Well, why did I do that is because I was afraid that I wasn't going to measure up on the world stage the way everybody expected me to. I was a highly touted fighter coming out of the reality show, The Ultimate Fighter. Dana White was high on me. And I injured myself leading into the fight, and I didn't want to lose the opportunity to fight in front of the first in Dublin, Ireland, or to fight in the UFC. So I broke, and it was a decision made based in fear, because I thought that if I didn't do it now, it was never going to happen. So I suffered from this syndrome of instant gratification. I had been working for a long time at this point, and I wanted it now. And I wasn't willing to I wasn't willing to listen to the things I was being told and take it slow, because ultimately it might have been lasted, or the career would have been longer. But yeah, why do people typically end up doing this? I can't tell you why other folks do it. I can tell you why I did it, which was I wanted everything now. And I think that's a big thing that kids are dealing with these days.
Right.
They see things on social media, and they see how people are living their lives, and they want that. And everything's at a click of a button today. You can buy whatever you want with one click of a button. So it starts to breed this culture of instant gratification. And that's what I ultimately fell to.
Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, it's a different time than when I grew up, 30 years ago, where there wasn't all of the instant information that you could get. And we've been told, Mike, as you know, for centuries, you got to get bigger, you got to get stronger, you got to get faster if you want to compete at the next level. And
Right.
Nowadays, if young people aren't given the information they need, for example, proper nutrition, what is your training regimen? How are you taking care of your body? Sleep. There's a whole bunch of topics that we could talk about on that discussion. But what they look for is, okay, how do I achieve that ultimate physical goal? Just like you were looking to, and I want it now. I don't want to wait 3 or 4 months of training. I need to do it now. And that's ultimately where these decisions are made. Now, while you were using these drugs to help you perform, could you tell a noticeable difference from when you were competing clean versus, when you're training, competing, using the performance enhancing drugs?
Sadly, not really. Most people think that you take a steroid, you get bigger and faster and stronger, but you still have to put the effort into what you're doing. So there's a common misconception, I believe, that if I just take steroids, I'm going to be a professional athlete, and that is not the case. I definitely didn't see benefits of steroid use in the performance. Where I did see the benefit was in the recovery process. Mm-hmm. So it allowed me to live a lifestyle that wasn't conducive to what a real professional athlete should be doing. I was able to go out and, party more often than I would be if I had to focus on my sleep, like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. So not using steroids forces you to be a disciplined individual. Using steroids actually weakens your mind and makes you a worse athlete in the long run.
Especially in a sport, and most professional sports are this way, where you've got to be strong-minded. I mean, when it comes to MMA, I mean, like I said before, you cannot be weak-minded, because, I mean, everything focuses solely on your nutrition and your training for a fight that you could get really, really hurt if you're not prepared for. So, I mean, that's super important always to think about. But what's interesting is what you said about, when you were using the performance enhancing drugs. And, I specifically asked that question because so many professional athletes that I've talked to that have used performance enhancing drugs, the majority of them will tell you, I mean, they felt better and they competed better without the use of the drugs. It was, but the recovery piece, like you're talking about, is one of the key pieces that a lot of people don't understand, that a professional athlete are going to use these drugs not really to get ready for the performance itself, but solely to recover following the performance, especially in a sport like MMA.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, I had an injury, and the quickest way back it was poor advice, but the quickest way back was to use. And I think if you're in the wrong mindset, or depending on how you grew up, or depending on your circumstance or situation, you're more apt to listen to poor advice and do the wrong thing than you would be if you had the right support system around you.
And I mean, as an athlete at that time, I mean, did you feel pressure from other fighters to use these drugs? Was it more from your coaches, or was it, the majority of the pressure put on by yourself to go down that path of using performance enhancing drugs?
Well, at this time in MMA, they were giving out testosterone exemptions in the UFC. So some of the big name fighters, you had Randy Couture, Ben Rothwell, you got Chuck Liddell. I mean, you've got these, tier one athletes. Their names are plastered everywhere. I mean, Vitor Belfort. These guys were actually participating in sport, allowed to use testosterone because some doctor wrote them a prescription for it. So as an amateur athlete or even a young level pro, when you're seeing the best in the sport use, you're naturally going to think that that is what I need to do to get to the top of the sport. When the media got a hold of that and they started writing about it more often, it pressured the UFC to change their stance on testosterone exemptions. And eventually now they've brought USADA in and have started testing athletes randomly. So I think just because the sport was so young, and, I'm a firm believer, and there is neither good nor bad. It's just the decisions that we make at the time. The sport has naturally changed. And, I just happened to be involved in the sport when it was growing, and, the media was starting to take attention. And now I feel like it's a completely different sport. I feel like maybe in the past, I think Dick Cheney called it human dog fighting or something. And I believe maybe that's where the sport actually started. But now this is a true sport now. Guys are getting tested on a regular basis. USADA will show up at your front door, knock on the door, and expect you to pee in a cup. So you never know where they're coming. So I think naturally now it's in a good place. But back then it was just the pressure to compete at a high level, and seeing the athletes that were at the top using, naturally as a young kid, you end up doing the same thing.
Yeah. And we got to, take this thing and step back a second. I mean, these are actual humans. These people have families, their brothers, their sisters, their aunts, their uncles, they might be parents. So their safety is obviously of utmost importance. And we know, I mean, the sport is obviously dangerous before you introduced any sort of drug into the sport. But, it also keeps all of the fighters protected from short-term and long-term health problems that can happen while they're using the drugs, or even once they are finished and have retired from the sport, causing long-term health issues. But I know a question that a lot of people ask, and we get this just being around other sports, but how prevalent do you think that the use of performance-enhancing drug is in the UFC today? Do you think it's still going on, or do you think the testing programs curb some of that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I definitely think the testing program has put a stop to some of it. But there's always going to be athletes looking for the competitive advantage. I mean, I think there's a documentary called Icarus, if you haven't watched it before.
Oh, great. It's great.
Which shows you the lengths that athletes will go. I mean, you had professional cyclists stopping during their races to do blood transfusions. So there's always going to be darkness around athletics when you're talking about major money. Because money, one of those deadly sins, greed, will make people do the wrong thing. And you mentioned, these athletes have families. Well, in some cases, this is their sole income. So they're going to do what they need to do to ensure that their family eats. So when I see athletes get crucified over, a decision that they made, most people don't understand the circumstance that they were in. So, we got to give a bit of grace to everybody, because in most cases I find people are good people, but they just tend to make a poor decision under poor circumstances.
We all have, right? I mean, we've all made mistakes. We've all made bad decisions. And one of the things is that I really admire about you. And, I'm so glad and blessed that our paths in life cross so we could have this discussion. Is this event in your life was very impactful to you. And I'd really like for you to discuss how it made you feel when you heard the news that you failed a drug test. And did it even surprise you that you had failed, or did you know when they had you provide that urine sample that you're like, oh man, I'm going to probably test positive on this?
Yeah. So I had a fight, and I got my card got pulled. I went in and gave them my sample, and I still had to go and fight. And I knew in my heart that I was going to fail this drug test. I had the fight. It was a great fight. It was fight of the night. The media was talking about, how I was the next big thing coming out of Florida, and how my MMA career was so bright, and I was doing interviews and podcasts, and this whole time in the back of my mind, I was just waiting for the other foot to drop. And then it did. On my birthday, my manager called me and said, Mike, you tested hot. You have the option to tell Dana and the UFC the truth, or we can make up some lie. And me and my manager at the time, he's a good guy, his name's Lex McMahon, we worked through that together and decided that the truth is probably the best option. And I told them exactly what had happened. I thought I was taking this one drug that should have been out of my system, because this is how the game works. But in reality, I was taking another thing, and I tested positive for that. And they started to ask me questions about the process of using performance-enhancing drugs, knowing when your fights are going to happen. So that is where they decided to implement USADA. So in a way, I feel like a bit of a martyr, obviously, because my career ended. But at that same time is when the whole shift of the usage of performance-enhancing drugs in MMA started to change, because I think the top of the food chain, the owners, the brass, they understood that athletes had figured out, without even that much money, they had figured out how to game the system.
Exactly.
And I think it's cool that USADA is now testing, because now you actually see these athletes forced to do the right things.
You're right.
And ultimately for an athlete, because it took me a long time to get there, ultimately for an athlete, the journey should be about the discipline that you gain throughout your process as an athlete. Not everybody is going to be a professional athlete. That is a genetic thing in most cases. So you should really dive into the process of being an athlete, because if you don't end up being the top 0.01% in your sport, you're going to have to get a regular job. You're going to have to do something that you might not enjoy, but that discipline you learn through your athletic career, especially as a teenager, will carry through for the rest of your life. So don't game the system, man. Like, actually get into the process. Foundation, right? Houses are built with blocks, and without a great foundation, they're shaky and they'll crumble at some point.
Yeah, that's tremendous advice. But one thing you also said too that really opened the curtains to give people a look into what really goes on in professional sports is you were given the decision, or at least the opportunity, to come out and say, oh, well, I had taken a dietary supplement that was contaminated, which, again, I don't want to take anything away from that, because we know, about a quarter of the dietary supplements on the market will have banned substances or illegal drugs in them. But a lot of athletes will use that as an excuse versus saying, yes, I was taking an illegal drug. I failed my drug test. I'm gonna take my rap here, and whatever penalties I might have. And you made that decision to do so. But a lot of people don't understand is, these athletes, I mean, they do have a decision if they want to come out and be 100% honest, knowing what they were putting in their body. But the other thing is, or I could say, yeah, it was from food or a contaminated product. And a lot of people think, well, that's going to make it a whole lot better. But the general public's not stupid, right? I mean, everyone knows athletes, as long as there's big money on the line, just like you said, I completely agree. there is going to be that temptation to use drugs. And I really have to commend you for stepping forward and saying, hey, yes, I use drugs. I'm very sorry for this. And now you're out sharing your story with others so that they can learn from you. But it also opens those curtains for people to sort of get a behind the scenes look into what really happens when a professional athlete tests positive.
Yeah, you have a choice. I would have to, pat my dad on the back. He was always the guy that said, if you did something wrong, be a man about it and own it. In the long run, people will respect you for your decision. It's obviously going to bring some pain and some turmoil in your life at that time. But in 20 years, man, no one's going to care that I was a professional mixed martial artist. They're going to care about my character, dude. They're going to care about my character. And
exactly.
Those are the decisions that you're making on a daily basis are what's your character like?
Exactly. And that's why people will hire you. That's why people want you in front of their young people and, adult leaderships telling and sharing your story because you're human. You made a mistake. You owned up to it. And looking back, they'll say, man, that Mike he's a really stand-up guy.
Hopefully. God willing, my friend.
So while you're using these drugs, one of the questions is you get a lot from people, especially if they've had the opportunity to use some of these performance enhancing drugs. Did you experience any sort of physical or psychological effects using the drugs?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think most of the effects, depending on how you're doing it, I can only speak from my experience.
Exactly.
But the psychological aspect of it was probably the hardest thing, because even after I failed that test, I continued to use for a while because I could not get past the appearance of my body, right? And it started to create this body image issue that I had, or it created a body image issue I didn't have before. So yeah, there's definitely a psychological impact that lasts forever, because while using, you are going to look a certain way, and that is because the chemicals in your body are elevated. So when you stop taking them, you're going to look different, and it's going to be that way forever. Yeah. So even today, I'll see a picture of myself back in my UFC days, and I'll be like, oh man, I wish I could look like that again, right? And I'll never look like that again, because I can be lean, I can have abs, but I'm never going to look like, I think an ESPN analyst said I looked like Conan in my last fight. And when I was an arrogant person, I was like, oh yeah, that feels good. But now I'm like, I did look like Conan, and I'll never look like Conan again.
One of the things I'll have to do, Mike, we'll have a little fun. We'll take a picture of one of your last fights, and then I'll compare it to Mike King in the UFC to Mike King today, and we'll let people take a look and see how the body has changed a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
So if you could go back and talk with your younger self when you were an amateur, what advice would you give your younger self today, knowing what you know now?
Oh man, take your time. I guess it leads me to like this childhood nursery rhyme, right? There's let's say there's a rabbit, right? And the rabbit's really fast. He gets places really quickly, and everybody talks about the fast guy. Like, you never hear about the endurance runner, but you hear about Usain Bolt, right? Because he's fast. And then there's a turtle, and the turtle's slow. But it's remarkable to see how much distance a turtle will cover in 24 hours if you actually watch it. So life is pretty simple. We tend to complicate things. If you have a goal, whatever that is, stay focused on it. And every day you get the option to make a decision. There's going to be one voice that tells you the positive things, that tells you or gives you ideas, that gives you wisdom, that gives you the motivation to chase that dream or that goal. Yeah. And that is your friend. And then there's the other voice that tells you why you can't do it, why you shouldn't do it, that sets limitations, and that's the enemy. I would encourage kids to start to build a relationship with the voice that is their friend and learn how to deny the voice that is their enemy.
That's great advice. And I mean, you've been wonderful to talk to, Mike, and there's tons of great information throughout this podcast that you've left not just young people with, but they're adult influencers and how they help guide them along their journey in athletics. And as we wrap up, before I let you go, one of our favorite parts of this podcast, and if you're an avid All Me podcast listener, you'll know that we have a section of questions that I prepared specifically for you that are called our Curveball Questions. And what I'm going to ask from you, Mike, is I'm going to shoot these questions at you. They have nothing really to do with your professional career or anything like that. These are a lot of fun. So just shoot for the hip as soon as this answer pops into your mind. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, so I want to start with an easy question. You can only eat one food again for the rest of your life. What is it?
Pancakes.
Pancakes, yeah, those are my favorite. I don't know if you've ever tried the Kodiak cakes, the protein ones. They're pretty good, a little bit healthier, but I love pancakes. Question number 2.
Yep.
What was the worst job that you've ever had?
Oh, man. In college, I had to work through college. I was a mover. So I had to get up at 4:30 in the morning, go and load this truck, and go take people's stuff, their actual stuff, from home to home. And people are protective of their things, and so that was a terrible job.
Wow! So you would have to do that before you went to class?
Yeah, and then practice at the end of the day, and it was a thing, man.
But
it was a good thing.
Yeah, and if you're committed and you love what you do, and obviously, you wanted to get your education and participate in sports, you did what you had to do. Final question. Would you go in the Mothership with aliens if they landed on Earth tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm exploring, dude. That would be interesting to me.
I think I would, too. I would be like, guys, take me up. I want to see what's really going on up here. I've got a lot of questions. Well, Mike, this has been a whole lot of...
Speaker, man.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you, but I really appreciate your time this morning. I know you're a busy guy and taking time out of your day to visit with us, and just wanted to thank you for being open and honest and sharing your story with everyone. I'm going to look forward to getting this all posted, and I think it's going to be very impactful.
Thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity, brother. I appreciate you.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.